What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Pony Lawson, and this is Tattoo Critiques. Once again, thank you guys so very much for joining us. Today we are talking all about collector tattoos. These are the tattoos that are sent in by you guys, the viewers. But before we get started, if you could please hit that subscribe button, and if you're feeling real randy, go ahead and hit that notification bell, as we do put these out every week and we wouldn't want you to miss one. Our first tattoo on the list is sent in from GEORG.
We're all going to die. Didn't mean to remind you of it, but it is on your schedule.
Wait a minute. GEORG Sarland. And GEORG, you sent in this beautiful looking traditional tattoo. At first glance, this thing is a clean, striking tattoo. But I do think there are a few things that could have been done to help make this thing that much better. The first thing I notice is the shading in the areas of inconsistencies. For instance, that grayish blue shading on the tongue, it just ends a little choppy as it works its way into the skin tone. And when we come to the eyebrows, it just looks like those areas of shading are just randomly put in there. They certainly don't feel like they belong there. Those shades should have came off of those lines and then kind of just faded away. And lastly, the shading that's dropping onto that red eyeball batarang looking piece is just rather choppy. I think the artist could have evened that out, but it looks like the needle just kind of got away from them. The reds in this tattoo were a bold, great choice, but I do think the artist could have slowed down and really punched those things in, especially when it comes down to her earring, as I see a lot of skin tone just popping through. And if you look right below that, that little U-shape just really reads as an Adam's apple. I know it's supposed to be that little divot right under your neck, but it's really not reading as such. And while we're down here, the shaded areas that we talked about above, that same choppy shading is happening down here. I do think this tattoo has clean, strong lines, and the face is beautiful. But when we really start to break it down, it just looks like this thing was rushed. I just think if the artist slowed down and really took their time with that shading, this thing would be damn near perfect. But thank you so much, GEORG, for sending that in and showing off your work. All right, the next tattoo is sent in from Gabriel Mono, and Gabe, you sent in this Cyber Oni thigh piece. The first thing I'll say about this tattoo is, it is a very unique design, and I love the blending of styles you have happening here. You've got this nice futuristic cyber element mixed with this traditional Asian Oni mask. However, this thing is coming off a bit flat, and I think that could be cured with some additional black shading, because as it currently sits, I'm really only seeing two shades: black, medium gray, and then you've got your skin tone. There's not really a whole lot of depth happening here. If the artist were to have added some darker blacks underneath that mask onto the torso, I think it would have really lifted off that mask. And while we're talking about that mask, I also think it would have been nice to see some darker shades on those rounder parts, just to give it some more depth. I really like the heavier line weights in this tattoo. However, the thinner line weights, especially up in the face, just really aren't consistent at all. It feels like the tattooer may have had an easier time with those heavier line weights. And going back to that shading, the more I look at this, that back part of this tattoo really has no shading at all. So it really makes it hard to read. I think a lot of things are getting lost back here, and I'm having a hard time distinguishing what is what. Like, where are these wires going and where exactly does the front begin? Obviously, with the spinal cord, I can tell that's the back. I'm just having a very tough time figuring out where that transition to the front is happening. But much like the first one, I think this thing just needs a little more time, and those extra shades could really help bring this thing to life. But thank you, Gabe, so much for sending that in and allowing me to take a peek. All right, the next tattoo sent in is from Corrado, and Matt, you sent over this nice little design from the anime One Piece. Now, this is a pretty simple design, and it is done fairly well, especially when it comes to that color and saturation work. It does have a very nice gradient from that darker blue to that lighter teal. As you can see, there is some blood coming to the surface in those yellows, making it look a little patchy, but that is pretty common when it comes to those lighter tones. But as far as I can see, it does look like they are punched in pretty good. However, the one big thing I think this thing really is missing is line weights. You know I love them. I think this thing really could have benefited from having a nice thick black outline around the entire perimeter of the skull, head, and bones. Those thicker black lines would have really raised this thing off the background and made those blues pop even more. Even most of the references that I saw of this design had those thicker black lines. So I'm not really certain why the artist didn't make those thick black lines, unless of course he just couldn't afford a 9-round liner. Also, using a thicker liner is easier to produce more consistent lines. So had the artist used a thicker line weight, I really think you'd have a lot less squiggles. With all that being said, I'd still consider this a decent tattoo in my book. Thank you so much, Matt, for sending that in. You know what's better than collecting tattoos? What? Collecting tattoo aftercare. And you know who's got a better collection than anybody? Mad Rabbit. So don't forget to hit that link in the description and use code PONY20 to save 20% off of your entire order. Treat yourself.
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna treat myself.
All right, the next tattoo is sent in from Carl. And Carl, you sent in this black and white snake tattoo on your shoulder. Dude, we've already used that one a few times. Step it up. So Carl, I think this is a really rad snake, and you've got a lot of good elements happening here. The artist managed to use a nice range of tones and appears to have nice control over all these little lines. I especially like the dark shades near the bottom of the snake and how it has a nice gradient all the way through to the end of the tail. That technique alone is immediately adding that much more depth and dimension throughout this entire tattoo. Another thing that I think adds a lot of interest to this piece are these little black embellishments. It just seems to add a lot of nice motion and keeps your eyes moving around it. However, that one little smudge right in the middle just really ruins the whole tattoo. No, I'm kidding. It doesn't ruin the entire tattoo, but it really doesn't look like it belongs, especially because it looks like that piece was magged in and the rest are outlines, so it doesn't really fit in. Also, that front bottom tooth just looks a lot smaller than the tooth behind it, and I think that's because of that black shading that's butting up next to it. If we look through that black shading, you could tell that the outlines are pretty much the same, but since that black shading is drowning out that outline, it just looks a bit doofy. Another thing I want to touch on is all that white, and normally I'd say that's probably too much. However, since these are scales, it does keep this thing looking nice and shiny. So let's just slide. Knock it off. So Carl, this is a great tattoo with a lot of really good design elements. If only that smudge hadn't been there, this thing would be... But thank you so much for sending that in. And the next tattoo sent in is from Kelvin out of Hong Kong. And Kelvin, you sent in this really awesome half rabbit, half internal organs looking thing. Whatever it is, it's really fun, it's really cute, and it's got a lot of interesting features. This thing has some very nice soft gray shading in contrast with this pink, really making this thing pop. Now, I've definitely seen this style before in other artwork and even in toys, where you've got one cute side and one X-ray kind of side, but I think the artist really managed to capture this very well. I'm also a huge fan of the marker style this thing has in the wings and in the bow and arrow. It really just adds another level of creativity. And I'm not sure if the same artist did the text below it, but I genuinely thought you blurred out the background. This thing's just messing with my eyes. I love it. As a matter of fact, I love it so much, I'm just going to give you your flowers and congratulate you on being my favorite this week. I just think this thing has a lot of nice detail and was executed very well. There's just a certain tightness to this, and whoever the artist was clearly knew what they were doing. Not to mention the sorrow at the bottom of this is just pretty damn cool and really sold it. So once again, congratulations Kelvin on being my favorite this week. And on the note of X-ray tattoos, Kelvin's work really reminds me of our featured artist this week, and that artist is Z, aka ZZ Boy out of Seoul, Korea. And while Z takes an entirely different approach, his tattoos are extremely bold and vivid. Z strips away his shading, simplifying his designs, using deep blacks and a lot of bright colors. Z's tattoos are extremely unique, as I've never really quite seen something like his. And although not all of his tattoos use that X-ray design, most of them have very recognizable features and a very similar color palette. I'd almost guarantee if one of these tattoos passed me on the street, I would know it's his. Oh, and one more fun fact. All of his tattoos are entirely hand-poked, which is mind-blowing. What do you guys think? Should I give a stab at hand-poking? Either way, do yourself a favor, head on over to his Instagram and give him a follow. Don't forget to let him know I sent you. But that's going to be it for this week, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much to the collectors who sent in their work. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, I will see you guys next week.